Monk, your books are good, but they're not popular. Editors, they want a black book.
They have a black book. I'm black, and it's my book.
You know what I mean.
Look at what they publish. Look at what they expect us to write. I just want to rub their noses in it. Deadbeat dads, rappers, crack. You said you wanted black stuff. That's black, right?
We sold your book.
No.
We believe Mr. Lee has written a bestseller.
It's a joke. The most lucrative joke you've ever told.
Is this based on your actual life?
Can I ask what you were in for? Was it murder?
You said that, not me.
They ran 300,000 copies.
Your books change people's lives.
They're offering $4 million for the movie rights.
Yes! The dumber I behave, the richer I get.
There's already so much buzz because of the movie deal.
Michael B. Jordan is circling.
We want to put him on the cover in one of those scarves, I guess you would call them, tied around his head.
A do-rag?
Do-rag, that's it. Do-rag and a tank top with the muscles showing. We're thinking we can get it out in Argentina.
That's the beauty of pauses, right? That's the beauty of silence, right? Yeah. Like the statement was made, and then it's like I said, they could have had that whole breaking the third wall or fourth wall, fifth wall, whatever. I just like to say the 3, 4, 5. And look at us. Like every time that happens, like think about it. But that's the beauty of them just saying, I said what I said, boom, we're going to pause for a second and move on to the next thing. Is for people to marinate and think about those kind of things.
It's Jay. I'm back in for another one. And today I have with me
Sebrenia. I thought you forgot my name for a minute. I was waiting like
I gotta be more consistent, but sometimes I just kind of let the person I'm talking to introduce themselves, and then sometimes I introduce them. So I guess it kind of depends. So
okay,
partly my fault, because I'm sure I probably did it both ways, where I've said your name, and other times I've been like and then,
right.
Okay, so we had riches of, I don't even know if it's fair to even say, it kind of ties into all this too, but like almost like black themed movies or movies with black stories. I don't know. It's interesting. And the timing's interesting too, because we're in the month of February. And it's funny, even with that, with, Black History Month and all that kind of stuff, I think some of these movies that we've seen and we're going to discuss kind of plays into my feelings about it too. I don't even know how I feel about Black History Month, right? Because even I know some people are on different sides of that. They think it's good because it's a showcase, but then the other side of it is like, well, it's Black history all the time. It's American history, so why would it need to be separated out? So it's funny how the whole thing with highlighting and presenting in a special way could kind of backfire in a way to segregate and separate out, in the same breath, which is kind of interesting. So only reason why I think this wasn't planned with the movies that we got. So we got American Fiction, we got the Book of Clarence, and we got Origin. And it's funny, like in one of the movies we saw, if this is a thing that was supposed to be done on purpose for Black history, it would have been a slave movie. It would have been a drug thug movie, or it would have been some kind of ignorance or whatever representing, Black History Month. Nothing necessarily uplifting, but something that's just kind of what America deems as Black history, or how the Black narrative, which is so interesting that American society has done a great number on the narrative of Black folks. And even though others are definitely guilty of it, we are just as guilty for drinking the same Kool-Aid. So we're all kind of in the same situation, and it's kind of like a thing of unlearning and gaining perspective to kind of dig yourself out of a ditch that you did not put yourself into on purpose. And so I guess that's where empathy kind of comes in with folks, because it's kind of like, when I saw this situation happen, I thought this automatically as well. Like, because we all kind of had the same Kool-Aid. So we all, see pretty much the same, even when it's a truth that you cannot verify. But we saw it enough just like everybody else. So sometimes we were thinking like, oh, how can they think that about us? Well, how can you think that about yourself? Depending on the person. So it's a whole thing.
Right. I think we talked about this before, about who gives the green light to these themes. And we basically get what we get. Mm-hmm. And with the 3 movies that we saw, I think they were probably hard fought. and a sense of being made. Also, we have to kind of put into the, factor in that it's Oscar season. So we know that during a certain time of the year, we get an onslaught of films that are Oscar worthy. And all three of these films, to me, obviously were Oscar worthy. So I think we have benefited from, the fact that they just happen to come out around this time of the year. And it happened to be, Black History Month is like a bonus when it comes down to these three films.
Yeah. And I like how they were just like, everybody's like coincidentally Black and not trying to fit into a quote unquote Black narrative. So I thought that was interesting too. That's why I kind of think it wasn't really planned like that, because it was just so kind of organic feeling as far as like I said, the themes and the way the stories were. It wasn't what you would consider what we normally would get in that kind of situation. Because anytime it'd be some kind of Oscar bait kind of movie, it would be a slave narrative, and if it was a free person, it was about that free person going back into slavery. so even with that, it's just like, when do we get these kind of movies where they're not in that particular box, and the story is still strong, the story is still true, the story is still important, and it's still a realistic story, even though it's not the story people don't normally see, but most people probably live.
So out of the three films, which one was greenlit by a huge studio and the other ones were independent?
None of them. They all was pretty, for the most part, I think, meat and bones. And there's probably like a lot of favors called, did a lot of good work. And so that kind of gave them credit to sidestep things in a way, because we know from watching the movies that the way they were advertised and the way that they were presented, and I mean like in the theaters and what theaters were selected for them and what movie theaters were selected for them and the actual rooms that they were shown in, all, kind of got the same treatment. So that goes to say a lot. Unpack
that part where you said the rooms, because we've talked about that, but maybe that's audience, knowledge that needs to be kind of, pointed out.
So before we started recording, we were kind of joking about, when we saw the movies. And the first movie that we saw, it's funny, we saw it together, even though we wasn't necessarily seeing it together, was American Fiction. And I was going with a friend of mine to go check it out because he had told me about a book that had a story that kind of tied along with the narrative of the movie. And so he's asking me like, where do you want to sit? I'm like, I'm open, but normally I like to sit in the middle if possible, not too far back, not too far close. And so he had got the tickets. So I didn't see the tickets at the time. And so we're getting our seats and folks are already in there. It was already kind of dark already. I don't think the movie had started yet, but we're trying to find our seats and stuff. And so I'm counting out the seats. So we're in this row, walking down the way. And I look down. I was like, Sabrina? I think I made a smart comment.
First, you just started laughing in my face. And I was like, and it was already dark, and your friend was like, hello. And I was like, what's going, you know what I mean? It was just kind of like, am I in the wrong seat? I thought I was a little confused. I was a little confused. And then you just started laughing. And then I was like, I guess I'm in his seat. And you kept laughing.
I thought you heard me, so you probably just thinking like, wait, like, are you talking to me? So I didn't even think of the fact that me even joking, you wouldn't necessarily even think to look up, because like, well, you obviously not talking to me. I'm sitting where I'm supposed to be sitting, about to watch a movie. Who are you walking up?
Right.
So I thought that was.
And then I just said Jason, and then you started laughing again. So it was pretty funny. It was funny.
So so that's how that happened. That's what started this journey, and we just like, oh, this movie's coming up too, and this movie's coming up too. But it was interesting being in that theater, because I go to that theater all the time. First of all, this movie was out for about a month, and it was only playing in our area. It was playing in San Francisco and Oakland at the Grand Lake Theater. And so I thought like Vallejo would have it, but they didn't. And so about a month later, when they had like a bigger opening of it, then it finally showed up in Vallejo. But also the trip was the theater that I was in. Like, I go to this theater all the time. They got the stadium seating. They got the, not only they got the recliner seats, they got the heated seats, right? So they got the whole hookup at this theater. I have never seen a theater that small where there was like one row behind us and one row in front of us. So I was almost thinking like, that doesn't make sense. But, it was fine for what it was, but it was interesting for the movie not to be there for so long in the first place. And then two, it was like one of the smallest theaters And it was a theater I'd never been into before, but this is the first time that I've been in that theater 3 consecutive times for the same types of movies. And when I mean types of movies, I mean black movies, that they use that same small theater. And who knows, it could be partly too that, you know, they wasn't expecting a lot from those movies. They didn't expect for a lot of people to ask for them. So they trying to say the bigger theaters for the bigger movies, but it's like, it's no real big movies out right now anyway. This,
right.
You know, they're playing movies that still like, you could stream at the same time, damn near. It's like, or they're having foreign films there, or, you know, concert events and stuff at the theaters just to kind of fill up the seats with stuff. So I don't know.
That does have some consideration in the sense of what type of films they were. They weren't, you know, slave narratives. They weren't films that had, you know, violence in it, that kind of stuff. So, you know, maybe because of the dialogue type of film, you know, the film that you need to really just kind of, you know, just sit and pay attention to, pay really strict attention to in order to really understand, you know what I mean, what's going on, because it's a dialogue film, that they just thought a lot of people aren't going to come to see this, you know. And I don't know, there's got to be some kind of science behind where they place those movies. And like you said, to see all 3 of them basically in the same theater was really interesting.
Yeah, to me, it was very similar to, and not jumping too far ahead, but in American Fiction, where like what happened to one of the characters in the story, where he was saying, why is my book over here when it has nothing to do with that? It should be over there. And it's just like, and the guy's like, hey, I don't make the rules for the placement of where the things go. So if I were to complain about why is this movie in this small theater that I've never seen before, it would be the same thing. Like, hey, we don't choose. It's not up to us to where this is put. And so it's just funny how we got a little bit of the experience of the character put upon us in our viewing of his own movie. That's meta for your butt.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's get into this. So the first movie we're going to talk about, the 3, and like I said, the movies we saw was American Fiction. We saw the Book of Clarence, and then also the movie Origin. Okay, so this first one, synopsis is a novelist who's fed up with the establishment, profiting from black entertainment, uses a pen name to write a book that propels him into a heart of hypocrisy and madness he claims to disdain. What's funny to me as an artist, it's almost kind of like, I understood where he's coming from. Like, you get kind of tired and fed up of something, and it's just like, you know what? If I put too much thought into something, it could be considered as, you know, too heady, or people won't understand. It's not what the audience wants. And he's just like, you know, I'm gonna do some crap I don't believe that I totally opposed to, and just throw it out there because I don't care. And then it becomes successful. And you expect for it to be like above them, so it would be rejected, but instead they love it. And so I thought it was just kind of funny, because I've thought that about certain things. Like, am I overthinking things? And can I do this in a different kind of way? And it's just like, you feel like it's insulting or belittling, but it's also what the audience is wanting. And so a lot of times I think a lot of artists just choose not to engage, because it's kind of like, I can't, it's not worth the money, you know, or the success to have to be less or feel like you give an inferior work just to win. It was interesting to see this in a movie with a writer dealing with the same kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
So what was your thoughts on the movie? So we won't do spoilers yet, but what was your overall thoughts of the movie? What'd you think of it?
You know, kind of going into it, I had, you know, read about it as far as, you know, the reviews and then, you know, saw the previews of it. I like Jeffrey Wright a lot.
Yeah.
You know, so he can get my money. So, you know, when you have him in a film, it's usually, you know, spectacular. So I was looking forward to seeing him do his thing. And then the ensemble cast was great. Yeah. You know, Erica Alexander, haven't seen her in a long time, you know, and what I've seen and heard from her more of has been about the whole living single, not controversy, but in the sense of people saying, I think she started off kind of going on like not a tour, but you saw her popping up a lot talking about the Friends thing, where one of the, I forget which one it was, one of the folks from Friends said there should be a Black Friends. And she was like, oh, there was. As a matter of fact, it was first called Friends.
Right.
And then they changed it to living single. So like, let me break it down for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Living single, you know, it's all these different layers of like Sex in the City. I mean, I used to watch that all the time and be like, where are the Black people at? Where are the other ethnicities? Where are the other POCs? But it was pointedly, you know, obvious that was from based off of a living single. So like, I could appreciate the fact that like, I'm sure she was doing other work, but we hadn't heard from her in a while. And then she was doing that. And now she's in this movie. And she was great in this movie.
Yeah, she was.
I don't know why she hasn't been acting more since Living Single, but she was just naturally just great, effortlessly. It wasn't like she was trying to do anything different. She was just very natural in the way that she relayed her character in this movie.
Right. And you know she did a good job because all the years of her being ingrained in our head as Max, for her to be somebody else and not question it shows a lot. Because most people will be stuck. Like, I was not stuck for a moment. It was just like, oh, it's her, you know? And then to have that to back it up, it's like, oh, you know, but she is this character. So I thought that was it said a lot. It really did say a lot. But she's also a writer. I think she writes like sci-fi books and stuff like that. So she's been doing stuff behind the scenes, but you know how Hollywood is, and she would get, you know, jobs here and there, but you kind of know how they're barely looking for young Black women. So they're not going to be looking for any older Black women, even though they just have just as much to contribute, if not more. So it's just about having those roles and things to have folks in. And so, you know, what happened to her is what kind of happens to everybody, not everybody, but, you know, in that situation with older Black actresses. And when you have people like Angela Bassett, you know, everybody is not lucky to be around this long. You know, it's hard to pivot when there's no space to pivot. So hopefully this will be a wake-up situation where people will be like, oh yeah, we can use her other places and she can still do her thing. But it was neat to have Tracy Ellis Ross, and it's kind of interesting because with her, I can't say she's necessarily my favorite, but I liked how she's very personable to me in this, you know what I mean? And she was funny, and not funny like they wrote her funny, but her playing this sister really felt authentic. She felt like a regular person. I see her on a lot of stuff, you know, like on you know, shows and stuff and movies and stuff, but then also, you know, real life stuff. And this is the most personable I've felt seeing her, you know, and it was really neat to see. So it gave her a whole other like, for me.
I think the other parts that we've seen her in, she's basically very authoritative in a sense, you know, playing a mom on, you know, the Girlfriends thing. She was the voice of reason. And in this one, she was like, you know, I'm a professional just like you, but like, I need your help. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can't do this by myself. We haven't seen her as vulnerable as she, you know, in this role as we've seen her in other roles. Yeah,
that's a good point. Because even if you didn't know who she was, like, she felt like Diana Ross's child and the stuff that she played. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like, certain people, they kind of walk with something, even if they don't say it. So it's interesting. Like, this was almost kind of like she was just, you know,
somebody's sister.
Or her mother's daughter. Yeah. So I thought that was kind of nice. It was just like, oh, that was cool.
I just thought it had so many layers. And it just kept being more layers and more layers and more layers. You know what I mean? In the sense of like starting off with just kind of him and him being a writer. Imagine going to school for that and, you know, finishing and, you know, writing these books, and then your publisher's like, hey, you know, this isn't it. You need to do something else. And him fighting that, you know what I mean? And that's that kind of code switching in a sense that we all kind of have to do to fit into, you know, where we exist, you know, in order to make a living, you know what I mean? So like, luckily he had a personal relationship kind of with his publisher that he could speak to him in that manner, you know, like, well, I don't want to do that. I want to do what I've been doing and, you know, be an author, you know, of that realm. I don't want to necessarily change for the audience, which goes back to what you said. Any artist has to fight with that all the time. You know, don't make a film for your audience, make it for yourself. Don't make it, you know, art for yourself, for an audience, make it for yourself, you know. So that's things that comes up all the time when it comes down to even, you know, as we're seeing in the publishing world. you know, like, let's see what sells, you know. So that was interesting to see that at the jump of the film. Like, this is what we're dealing with from the beginning, you know. The parts about family was interesting. Didn't really necessarily expect that. Just thought it was going to be him kind of fighting, you know, to exist as an author. Like I said, it was just, you know, even him having like a love life. You know, it was just kind of like, what else can we put in here? Keep doing it. You know, this is a real person. You know, and as people, we are multi-layered. So that was unique and very, you know, very interesting about the film, that it was definitely multi-layered. And if you think about it as a human being, it's the same thing that we're going through on a daily basis.
Yeah, I agree. I like the movie a lot. I was surprised how day in the life it was. I like how it said a lot without saying too much. You know, it's almost kind of letting the plot play out, right? And some stuff be so, you know, okay, this is where we're going, this is what's going to be the problem. It's like, not saying somebody's life has to be perfect or whatever, but it's almost like it was counter to all the narratives you would have put on him. You know what I mean? So I thought that was kind of interesting, that it still told the full story without falling into the normal trappings.
Right.
And it was just a good story about a artist trying to figure out his way. And I thought that was very interesting.
Even the time that they spent on every subject matter was enough for you to be like, oh, okay, and then on to the next one. You know, you didn't live in it for too long to just focus on that, because it was always something else, you know, coming up around the corner, you know. Just
like in real life. And so it was folded in versus separate. It wasn't on separate plates. It was all on the same plate, because, you know, it wasn't like, oh, I got to talk about this because it's outside of me. No, this is just folded into life, you know. And sometimes we don't have this the luxury of having things on separate plates. Sometimes we have to have one plate and we just got to deal with all of it, and we just have to eat it one way or another. And so this was a good example of that. And it also shows a good example of how, you know, for some Black folks, like how we deal with things. It's not separate. It's all the things, you know, and it don't have to be all the things like, you know, me, like being a Black man, like my day is not like the cops pull me over on the way to work and I get arrested at work, and the cops pull me on my way home from the police station and I get arrested again, and then the woman grabs her purse. It's not all those things, but the things that he was going through with the, you know, stuff he was going through is almost more realistic of the levels of stuff going that you would not take as being a big deal unless you've seen it in a certain kind of way to be like, oh, that's, you know, all these aggressions are kind of happening. And how the stuff you kind of go through, and it's no stopping for complaining or whatever, and you're seeing this craziness, but you're the only sane person in there, and you're not seeing the confirmation depending on where you work or who you deal with from your peers. So you got to walk with this craziness, and do you say something or not? You know, do you play along with it or not? Like, he could have easily played along with it, but it's almost kind of like, you know, I'm acknowledging this craziness, and it's so it's interesting to see how. But I think, like, when people think of the plight of a Black person, like, sometimes it is those things where it's just this constant blatant discretions and stuff, and then sometimes it's just these micro things and situations that, you know, no matter where you turn, is somebody else writing your narrative, somebody else, you know, putting things upon you, and you just trying to go through your life, you just trying to deal with the problems that you have as a normal person. And they put an extra scoop of crap on top of that. That you still got to eat, even though you're not hungry. I'm full. I had enough mess. I'm good. No, extra scooping for you. But that's, but that's how that is. But that's how that is. So this did a good job of showing how that goes. And I think it was kind of interesting because I've seen movies where they'll just kind of blatantly say, oh, this is this is that caused us. And to me, this wasn't a lot of finger pointing, but it was a lot of acknowledgement of situations. And I thought it would be a thing where, you know, as Black folks, we would just catch it because it's like, oh, yeah, that's Tuesday, you know. But I was surprised how other folks were just kind of like, that's what, huh? I was surprised.
You got to unpack that a little bit.
I was surprised that people caught that and was kind of like, you know, it's almost kind of like a dog whistle, and like, oh, you heard that too?
There's a lot of that in there. A lot of that.
And it's not even like, and a lot of it's due just to culture, you know, certain things you just wouldn't know about. But, you know, the world is bigger now. Like, things that people didn't know, like when the whole thing came out about, the head nod or the head check when you see another black person, like even all that kind of stuff, that's like a phenomenon thing that's just like how we've been doing. So that whole thing of cultures having things to themselves or whatever, that's almost a thing of the past as far as that kind of stuff, but it was interesting that a movie that I thought wasn't really blatantly talking about black folks' dealings with white folks, it kind of showed how it happens versus talking about it. Because somebody said it out loud, it sounds like a complainer, or you're making stuff up, or you're taking it wrong. So something about how this movie laid that out, it laid it out for everybody. And I thought it was very interesting because it did it without a loudspeaker. It just kept on moving like next, that's that. And so I thought it was very interesting how it was able to do that and to strike a nerve, to make people sit up or wonder without just being blatantly offensive. Because it wasn't supposed to be offensive. It's just like some stuff is just the truth. And it could be offensive if you don't like it, but it's almost kind of like you saying to me, like I got male privilege, and I'm like, what? Knowing that there's a difference between a man and a woman and how the world deals. And it don't mean that we both don't have issues, but it's a different kind of issue. And just like I might have something different than you, and you being offended and like, oh, what? So it was just interesting that stuff was touched upon and everybody kind of saw it. And I thought that was very interesting.
I think in the trailer, you saw that with Issa, when she was in that conference, room, and they were just talking about her book, and she was, obviously, we were given the impression that she was highly educated, and she had, written this book, and everybody had heard about it, and everybody thought it was such a great book. And then she breaks out into, reading a chapter, and then you see his head almost explode. Like, what just happened here? You know what I mean? And that's the lure to bring you into the theater. That is the part right there that was like, oh, a lot of people aren't going to want to come and see this intellectual black film. You know what I'm saying? And it was that. But to break in like the whole, like, it's not just that, it's this part too, is the lore. Like, wait a minute,
Right. Because that was really the money shot. Because really, I would have saw the movie anyway because Jeffrey Wright. But I would have loved to have seen that for the first time in a theater instead of on the trailer. It was very funny on the trailer, but just imagine just sitting there and then it just breaks out. You already see the name of the book. Okay, so we're going to get more into this later. But okay, I'll just say this, that I really love the movie. I thought that that it did a lot in a short amount of time considering. I think it kept the humanity and it also gave a lot of truths. And I liked how, like I said, it was folded into the journey of this particular person, just trying to go day to day and the things that he's coming across. But to me, this movie really felt like it was about an artist fighting for his own narrative. And so I think that there's something for everybody. But but like you said, I think the way the trailer gave they gave something to, it gave something for, depending on people's intentions, it gave something for everybody to like maybe make them curious enough to go check it out. And it did do that. But to me, it was a pleasant surprise, and I wasn't expecting this from this. But I'm so glad it was, because I've seen things before that I thought was going to be a full meal, and then turned out to be like, like I like the premise, but they never really, had its full potential. I liked how this really used that time well, and it told the story well, and it wasn't belittling, it wasn't talking down or anything, and it was just like I said, it saw a lot, it brought up a lot, and it knew what it was dealing with before it tried to tell us the story. Because sometimes people try to figure out stuff on the page. They try to figure out while they're painting or working on it, right? It's another thing to know what you have while you're doing it, so you could give it the maximum attention and narrative when you give it. You could tell that's been sat with, versus like, okay, I'm gonna throw it out there and let the world figure it out for themselves. No, they knew what they were doing.
Right.
The director, Cord Jefferson, he knew what he was doing. The writer of the original book, Percival Everett, he knew what he was doing. So that made it a different kind of experience. A person who knows where they're going and how to do it versus somebody just trying to figure it out along the way, which is nothing wrong with that. But it's something to say, and it hits different when somebody is an expert marksman. It hits different. You get a hole in one, you get a bullseye. It feels extra special when you got it on accident, but it's nothing like I'm gonna do this and I did that. It's Nothing beats that. Nothing beats that. That's not, luck. That's skill. And so that was one of those kind of movies for me.
But piggybacking off of what you just said, the cast knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
They knew what they were doing. They understood the responsibility of it all. You know what I mean? The way that they relayed the information on page, like I said, with Erica Alexander and all of them, was just seamless. It was like, like you said, a day in the life. Like you just walked in their living room and they were just being themselves. You know what I mean? And that's the reason why it's been nominated for all of those different nominations.
Yeah.
Because of that, Yeah.
I really loved it. I would suggest it to folks to go see. It seemed like you would suggest it to folks as well.
I would.
Okay. Yeah. So for sure, go see it if you haven't seen it. If you've seen it, see it again. It's streaming as well. Yeah. So let's get into spoilers. This movie, this movie was a lot. This movie was a lot. Once again, this was a situation of a black man, a black artist, that's a writer, who is constantly fighting against a narrative that society is putting on top of him. He's constantly fighting it. The movie starts off with him, he's a teacher, a professor, and he's teaching. So that must mean he knows what he's talking about. If he has a whole class on it, and he's being questioned by a white student that have her feelings hurt about something that he decided to talk about. And it's like, how are you going to be more of a victim than the victim? And so it starts off with that, and it's done well. And it wasn't like, let's have this Karen type of character. No, this is what happens in the class for real. And it didn't have to be exaggerated. It didn't have to be hyper focused on the girl. They didn't have to show her arguments or anything. It's just the fact that, you're questioning the authority of a teacher who's talking about something that they decided to do the class on. Your power as a student was not to take the class or not to rewrite what the person decided to talk about or how he feels or the subject matters or his thoughts on it. Who does that? You don't jump in somebody's house and start changing the furniture. And so it's constantly that kind of stuff. But the movie starts off with that. And then when he defends himself, then he gets dismissed from his job. And they're questioning him. You know what I mean? So it's almost kind of like, you almost wonder how people get into certain situations in the first place, right? You would think that they earned it, and you think that people did enough work to earn something. But when the flip comes, that's when you know that they didn't base them choosing you off of merit. It could be something else because otherwise, how could you take out a pillar and not think the thing is going to fall apart? How you think you're not going to take out a piece of the foundation and the house don't fall down? And so it was kind of like, because his job could have been a quota situation. Who knows? It could have been. But I know, regardless if it was or not, they treated it like that instead of taking his side or thinking that you're of value to the situation. We're of value to this establishment, so we don't want you to leave. They could have said that.
Well, that goes from, what I've said lately. I've always kind of thought it, but even having experience with it myself is like, being Black, you can't afford complexities. You know what I'm saying? You can't the way that scene is that it was almost like she wasn't offended in the sense of like, oh, I'm upset. You can't use it because I don't want to hear it. It was almost like some sorrow was in it. Like, I don't want to be reminded of, that plight and all of that kind of stuff. It could have been for her own insecurities, or it could have been for the people in the room, being kind of that savior for the people in the room. She didn't take into account, as, kind of what he said, if I have to live with it, come on, let's just keep moving forward. Like if I'm dealing with it and I'm up here and have, gotten to this level in life, then it's not something we need to discuss in this class. Let's discuss the the information at hand. We're not basing anything on other than what I asked the class the question about, in that sense. Because
even he said, I got over it.
Yeah, he did. And when she got so offended, and this is part of that spoiler, and basically relieved herself, meaning left. I don't want to say relieved herself in any other way. I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression. But he was like, next. Okay, let's get down to it. You know what I mean? And that was like, that level of security with him, he wasn't even thinking about what was going to come afterwards.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't think about getting fired or anything else. Like, you hired me to do a job. I'm good at this job, and I am going to make sure that these folks in this class get their money's worth and get what they came here for. I'm not going to sit here and focus, 10, 15 minutes of attention on somebody whose feelings are hurt. Like, that's not what we're doing here, you know.
He don't get the grace to be the man that he is.
Right. Exactly. And he tried, and he didn't fight for it because he didn't think he had to, but he still had to stop what he was doing in his profession just to, appease somebody for 15 minutes, and that could have been shut down in several ways. It could have been shut down by folks in the class. In real life, that could have happened in real life, where the people in the class would have been like, hey, we're trying to get the lesson here. You know what I mean? If you have some kind of personal issue with it, then wait until after class and discuss it with the teacher, but you're taking time away from the class.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was an interesting part. Like you said, that was the start of it. That was the very beginning.
Yeah. So like I said, it was just all these kind of encounters he's having, where he also showed that he kind of didn't have control of his, like I said, his life or his narrative, because he's dealing with the same thing with the publishers and stuff like that. And so when he kind of got suspended, or quote unquote take a break, just so happened during that time, it was an issue with his mom. So he went to go visit his family, which was interesting. And we got a chance to meet his sister, which I thought, Sister Lisa, played by Tracy Ellis Ross, which that was cool to see her in this light, which was interesting. And just their conversation and the banter of brother and sister and stuff. And, everybody making their little digs on each other. And I thought it was so funny when he was like, did I ever write anything that changed your life and touched you? And she was like, yeah, I had this wobbly table. And that's a mess. And that's a mess that a sibling would do just to take you down a peg. Like, even if you wrote a book that's published, like they use it to balance their wobbly table. And that's kind of like how we do. And on the outside listening, yeah, that sounds very hurtful and is messed up and stuff like that too. But, depending on your culture, it's just like something you kind of laugh at and roll off like, oh, shut up, and you say something back and you go on about your life. You're not broken in a corner because she joked about balancing her coffee table with my book. So I thought it just deflated the situation. It was a real moment that you don't see a lot of times in movies. You don't see between siblings and stuff like that. Usually it's just yelling about nothing in particular and stuff. And also, we know how it is to go back with our family and everybody's kind of working for their position again. The big sister's the big sister, younger brother's the younger brother, the mom is the mom, the dad's the dad, grandma, Nana, she's playing her role. So everybody just shuffling back into there. And you could be anything you are in your own household, but when you get back into that deck of cards, you know where your place is. You're third from the left.
Right.
Regardless if you're number one on the call sheet at home, you're third from the left in this game over here. And so I always like seeing that handled and especially handled in a cool way. And so I took to that part for sure. And even like with his thing about saying, she's telling him like, Dad liked you best, and that, me and the other brother got closer because of your relationship with Dad, and just kind of stuff like it. It said so much, and it was a quick drive. It was just them driving home, right? And they had all this world building just that quick, and it wasn't all this extra stuff that had to be drawn out. And even though they said and had conversations to give you narrative of what was going on, they also, when they had a chance, they showed it as well. And I like the choices on how they decided to deal with each thing, but it gave you a full catch up of what's going on, because we could have simply skipped that car ride and just knew that she was his sister and they had like this tension, but we didn't know why. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I liked how it kind of, the looks, the conversations and stuff like that. After that, we saw how it lined up, because we already had a breakdown of the situation, which I thought was very well done. And normally that's taken for granted, but I'm glad it was done.
I also liked Sterling K, his position in this film, where it was just, he was so kind of unapologetic in the sense of how he lived his life. There were parts where he was like, he was just so far out there of like me. And then it was just kind of like, oh, I got to pull myself back, because he wasn't being accepted for who he was. And probably had decided, well, that's fine. I'm just going to keep doing doing what I want to do for myself. But then realizing like, I need my family, I still need, these people in my life, and willing to kind of shift a little bit, if you will, in order to kind of put himself back in the fold.
With him, I thought it was kind of interesting because, okay, so I understand his side of like keeping certain things to himself and not sharing, but then also he made the folks who didn't know guilty of a crime they didn't commit. You know what I mean? Like he put on them already to be prejudiced or to feel a certain kind of way when he didn't know for sure if that was the truth or not. He could be right. He could be right. But I'm saying his reaction and how he dealt with his family was based off his perceived idea of what he think that they would think if they knew everything about him.
Right.
And we all kind of deal with that in a way. And it's just like, how many times have we actually, as our person in our own lives, felt open enough or free enough? Okay, are people dealing with who we are for real? And are we giving people enough to deal with us in a certain kind of way? Because sometimes people are dealing with us in a way of what's been given to them by us. So if you don't say that you like a certain kind of thing, how would you ever have a conversation with somebody who likes the same thing if you didn't share with them that you like that thing? And so the more open you are a lot of times, even though it could be backfired and used against you, it could also be a thing to connect you to people as well. And so it just depends on how good you are on deciding what you're going to share and with who. And also being brave sometimes to be like, well, it might not be taken the right way, but I'll take that chance and we'll see what's going to happen.
Right.
And so sometimes we get what we give. And but like I said, you have to decide, because the truth of it is it also could be used against you depending on what the situation is. But sometimes, like I said, we hold people accountable for things they don't have the full picture, so they can't give you more. You know what I mean? They can't take more string if you ain't gonna let more string out.
But also him dealing with a generation of unacceptance and probably purposely not living as close as he could be to the family, because that was a big issue that the sister mentions. She wasn't getting as much help as she needed. But for the younger brother, which was Sterling, to be living that far away, that was probably purposeful, because he was very free. You know what I mean? He just was like, everything about him was joy until it wasn't. And then it was joy again. He knew how to regulate himself, if you will.
It seemed like everybody, for the most part, kind of spread out, because Monk did the same thing. Could you hear like families going through stuff and not being as close as they were? It was just neat to see the foundation of that and how it was kind of built up and stuff. And the thing about him and his whole self, just like we would hear stories about people disowning their children or loved ones and stuff like that, that I would see more of a narrative on media than I did in real life. I've seen it's like, oh, we already knew and all that kind of stuff too. So some of that stuff was not our narrative of what we really saw, but we see in specials on, you come out, then your family throws you out of all your stuff. Not saying that doesn't happen, but I'm saying I've seen just as much, to my surprise, because the narrative is you say that it's over with, and I've seen just as much of acceptance and working through it than the latter. So like it can happen both ways, but it just interesting how sometimes we base what we're going to do off of what we perceive things to be, once again, narrative that may not be your narrative, but you kind of figured the story's already written because you've seen it written for somebody else. And so it's a lot of playing with that. And this movie does a good job with that. It was interesting with him seeing his mom going back to the house and stuff. And also I want to say too, I thought it was kind of interesting how like in the beginning of the movie, when he's about to do his journey of going back home, and they're giving the credits and stuff, and they kind of showing these pictures at the beginning. I thought it was really neat how the pictures, the artwork that was on there kind of described the situation that we're going to see in the movie. So we see the old house, we see the flower with the put out cigarette butt in it, representing his sister. We saw the pool with somebody jumping in the pool, which represents the brother, and he showed somebody writing something, and you see two figures in the background, one with a gun and somebody else doing something else, and that's him writing, so all like a lot of key things in the movie was kind of drawn. Even the white guy juggling balls, and one of the balls is a black character, just how everybody's just kind of caught up in these narratives and these circles, so it was interesting to kind of see like, oh, that's from the clip from the picture from the beginning. Oh, that's part of that. No, so I thought it was kind of neat how it kind of gave answers to what was kind of gonna come up in the story as we went along. But when they went to the house, I'm like, that's the house from the drawing. So it was neat to see him going home and seeing his mom and the banter that mothers give sons and stuff sometimes, just siblings and all that, and they're going out to eat. And what do you think about when they were sitting there talking before their mom was like, I guess went to the restroom, and Lisa and Monk was talking about their father, stepping out on their mom, and then Lisa was kind of like, oh, even caught dad kissing this white caught dad kissing this white woman, and he's like, did mom know? And it's just funny because you do have certain members of your family that knows all the stuff, and there's other members who don't know nothing. And so just even little stuff like that, but even the fact that it was even kind of brought up and in a movie, so it was just constantly showing layers of stuff in the conversation. And so I thought it was kind of funny and insightful too. And just how, like, I just, the sister kind of being like, hey, I just didn't want to blow up the spot,
But I think that, the fact that she mentioned it was a white woman was part of the semblance of where they were in society, because where they lived was a beachfront property, right? And, that scene where they were standing on the beach doing this, one part, and this guy, walks past this family and says, are you supposed to be doing that out here? And they're like, mind your business. You know what I mean?
Right.
And he's like, well, I don't think you're supposed to be doing that. And then Sterling K. Brown is like, I will kick your behind, and almost starts to run after him. It is almost like, are you supposed to be here? You know what I mean? Like, and that's in the fact, and the way that they dealt with him was basically telling them by saying, get on, mind your business. You know what I mean? And you could take that back when they weren't supposed to be on that, that property, or they were there as servants, you know what I mean? But they were standing their ground in that sense of just responding to him like he was just anybody, like, just get on, mind your business, And with the sister making a statement about seeing the dad, he didn't know that, but the younger brother knew. So that speaks to, like you said earlier, the closeness that those two had. They formed an alliance and basically relied on each other and kind of kept, that information away from him. Not necessarily on purpose, but that wasn't in their wheelhouse because those two were very close.
Yeah.
So that was interesting.
Yeah. A sister, which I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
I do love how it was handled though. That could have been really, not to say it wasn't heavy, but the way it was handled was, because sometimes I'd be triggered by stuff like that, seeing stuff like that, right? But the way it was handled for me, it's just like, okay. And then it was quickly offset by the memorial where Monk was reading off her final her final words, and with that character from what we've seen, that kind of makes sense. That's some stuff that she would probably say, and even the characters, depending on who it was that was there, had a certain reaction to it. The mom is stoic, the younger brother's laughing because he knows her so well. Monk reading it kind of like, huh? So you could tell who knew what and how they felt about, so that whole thing. And it was just so funny because even though when I saw that dude walk up, I knew, you know what I mean? Like, not I knew like this is an easy to read movie or situation, but it's just like, even in real life, you would think that something's going to be said. Now it's going to either be standing there looking awkwardly and like, or on the phone or whatever, or even having the nerve to say something. It's just like, again, it's like that student that he had in the beginning. It's just all this kind of, why are you in this? Nobody asked for your input, but yet and still, and them feeling comfortable enough to put that input, and depending on where they are in their situation, the level of them interfering depended. So even though she didn't have a lot of power in the classroom, she had enough to have him in trouble.
Right.
But she got the wrath of him in that classroom because of his position. Him walking down the beach, he's living in the same place they're living.
Right.
And there's no cops in the immediate area to make it dangerous. So you talking crazy, you gonna get it back. So all that stuff, so what they got back, like they're thinking like, I'm safe regardless. But it's almost like you gotta check the temperature, because depending on what part of the situation you're in, your reaction will vary. Right. But it's almost kind of like the dog who knows that they're chained up or not, right? You don't know.
Right.
You think they're chained up. So the person on the fence talking too much mess, that dog may jump over the fence and get you. You just don't know. So you need to read the room before you just assume. But you're assuming because you're on the other side of the fence that it's all safe and the person's locked up. But that's not always going to be the situation.
And that's also the beauty of directing when you look at it from a filmmaker's point of view. Yeah. He walked in front of them when they were performing.
Exactly. He could have went around.
The audacity.
Exactly.
Right. Like, there's something important going on, but I'm going to walk past you. I'm going to look at you, walk past you, stop to interrupt what's going on and say, are you supposed to be here? And are you supposed to be doing stuff? Yeah. Like, you couldn't wait till the end. You just in the middle of it. It's like, let's just disrupt this whole situation. Right. The audacity of that.
And it's just Tuesday. It's just Tuesday.
Right. Right.
It's just Tuesday.
Right. Right.
So I love how this movie didn't go out looking for trouble. Trouble was just situation just coming up, and that just goes to show it doesn't take work. You can just be you doing you, and all this stuff is coming. You know what I mean? And like I said, when I saw it in the corner of the screen, like,
here we go.
What's the chances of him walking around? What's the chances of him walking and probably walking through, which is disrespectful, but walking through and not doing something like staring or saying something about that? You know what I mean? And so it's just like, he's going to walk through that. And I hope he does it, but he's probably going to say something. And so when it came up and then just to see and they knew him. And he's like, man, you always like, dude, you always doing stuff like this. You always been messy, like
that part right there. Cause I'm like, did he not look at the folks out there and see that somebody wasn't with them? You know what I mean? Like, he could have understood exactly.
No, sorry for your loss. Yeah. No, nothing. Like, oh, I grew up with them. I know. I'm sorry. Right. Like a normal person would do.
Right, exactly.
Like, these are not children.
Right.
And even if they live there, you should at least think they're your equivalent, at least. If they live in the same place, same situation, you would assume. But that didn't matter. And so that
was great. That part was great. There was one thing that a character said, and I don't know if I want to mention who said it.
Okay.
But it was a female character, and she said something to the author. She said, "You are unknowable in this moment." And I thought, I love words. And when she said that, I was like, who says stuff like that? You know what I mean? Who says that word in that place and mean it the way that they did for what the occasion was? And it was just beautiful, in the sense of her just saying it and the harmony of that word matching up with what was going on. But it just stood out to me. That particular scene and that word stood out to me.
Yeah, to me as well. But it also because of the fact that, even though we didn't, or we get clues of it early on, by the end, we do know that he has an issue with sharing himself and what he's willing to give. And the truth is, he has more narrative being put on him than he's giving of himself.
Right.
So he has nothing to combat it. So you are what they say you are if you have nothing to say for self. So he's dealing a lot with that. So the whole thing with his publisher, and he's writing books, but the books are not just sticking, and he's having a hard time selling what he's trying to write and all this other kind of stuff, and he's just tired of it. And he's seen the success of Issa Rae's character, who's a quote unquote young writer who so that's where it comes up with the whole thing with the book fair thing or the author conference. And he's there, and there's nobody hardly there. And it's like, where's everybody at? And they say, you heard this new writer? And they go check out the new writer. Man, that was just, like you said, they used it for the commercial, but that would have been priceless just to see. And every time I saw that part, I just cracked up in the theater because it was just so funny, because it's just like, the funny part is that, and kind of like what Monk was going through with his mind exploding, trying to fathom that people are actually liking it, is the fact that we as the audience didn't know that was going to come out of her mouth. Everybody who paid to go buy that book and was at the signing and at the reading knew already. So they knew the words. We didn't as an audience.
Right.
That's what made it so funny on that side. For us, it was shocking. It's like, put it like this. If she didn't say that, or that wasn't in the book, who's to say that the audience would be there?
Right.
So they showed up for that.
Mm-hmm.
They showed up for the insult.
Right.
And we were shocked by the insult. And so that's what made it so funny. It was so counter to, you would think, like you said, she's all, professional looking and she's talking very calmly. Oh, yes. And this. And the woman's like, oh, could you give us more? Can you read an excerpt for us? Can you bless us with a passage? Well, sure. No problem.
Yo, Sharonda, girl, you be pregnant again? If I is, Ray Ray is gonna be a real father this time around.
But then, like I said, his head was about to explode, because he just kind of wandered in there. Remember, he didn't sit down. He just came in like, oh, he didn't know who she was. Up here for a few minutes and then duck out, afterwards.
Because he didn't know who she was. But that's the truth, though. But he was us.
Mm-hmm.
We found out the same time he found out. So and once again, he's looking in truth versus the reality, and it's conflict. Because most people, even with that, they would fix their face quick because they didn't want to be the outlier who's like, are y'all listening to this mess? Like, I'm sure people in the audience thinking that too. Mm-hmm. But because everybody's cheering and clapping and it's accepted, then they just go along with it as well. Mm-hmm. Now, everybody loved it. I'm sure people probably hated it, but then got around those people in the crowd and was just like, oh, okay. Right. So, he's the one got kind of caught off. So his face kind of gave it away. But also he believes that and thinks that too. Which also made it, interesting and funny that, like, what runs through this movie as well is this, like, they got like this black channel and this black story month, and they showing all this craziness, and they showing a clip from a slave movie and a clip from a gangster movie and all this other kind of stuff, and celebrating diversity in Black America. And the funny part is that's how that goes for real. Mm-hmm. Exactly. It was a realest fake trailer commercial I've seen in a movie that is exactly the same that it would be in real life. That was the joke part. So I laughed at that part too out loud, and that's why it was funny to me, because as offensive as it was very true and unfortunate, because that could be a real trailer and the Black stories for Black American History Month.
Right.
And that's what they see. And the truth is, most of the movies are that. Most of the shows are that. So it wasn't wrong, but the director had enough insight to know that's he knew the inside joke to put that in there.
But that's that filmmaking aspect of it, because in film, we've kind of talked about it before. It's show not tell. You know what I mean? Yeah. So like that's basically like, we're gonna put this in here because it's a true statement. A lot of you probably have seen this and know about it, but we don't even have to talk about it. We don't even have to speak to it. We're just going to put it here to let you see that this is the usual for, Black History Month.
Yeah. But that says a lot about the writer and director as far as them having a sense of self and noticing these things. Because like I said, we could be just as guilty as white people as far as being ignorant to the lies we are being told and the narratives we are being given without questioning them. We could be just as guilty. We could see things the same way without any other extra kind of insight, depending on what you went through, where you were born and raised, who you related to, your own personal incidents. Most people don't understand things happening till it happens to them. And they might be in a situation of privilege where it'll never happen to them. So what would be the relatability? A lot of people got woke because, they got married to a person of color, a Black person, or had a Black child that they adopted. Then all of a sudden, okay, we see it now. But it was the same world the day before they got put into your life. So just think of the people who were dealing with that before you saw it, right? And if the person who sees it, who's to say that they're in charge to change anything? And so they're swimming in a new pool, and they looked up and saw all the stuff in the pool that they didn't know before. But everybody that wasn't been in the pool, that's just today. Mm-hmm. And so they're probably trying to figure out, what do I do with this? But it's almost kind of like we're looking at each other like we don't know either. We've been here for years, and we're still trying to figure out what's up with this pool? What's the situation with this? And so, it's like people waking up and panicking because like, what? But, we've just been kind of living with it. And not that we should be. It's almost like, what's the other option? What's the way out? And so, it could be scary to wake up underwater. Yeah, it could be real scary. But that's the lives of a lot of us, where we just got used to not breathing.
Or we just keep swimming.
Yeah.
In various forms, backstrokes, you know what I mean?
But yet still swimming. Exhausted with no shore to be seen.
Right.
So our main character, Monk, he's fed up. He's getting tired. He's like, screw this. His publisher is telling him like, hey, they want a black story. He's like, I'm black. And it's funny because earlier he was talking to his publisher, and he was saying how he doesn't see race, but at the same time, a taxi driver is passing him up for a white person. So even though he didn't see race, the cab driver did.
Right.
And that cab driver affected his situation because he was trying to get somewhere and he didn't get that ride.
Mm-hmm.
And so he writes this story. He's seen all this stuff on TV, and it's funny, as much as he's taken back by it and he's offended by it, he seems to be watching it a lot. So I couldn't tell if it was saying a narrative, and it might be both. A narrative of that it's always on, and if you're going to see us, that's what you're going to see, or if it's like he's baffled and he's trying to watch it to see if he could get anything out of it and understand where is this craziness coming from. I can't tell. It might be both. But regardless, he takes what he's seen, what's bothering him, and what he dislikes, and he does his own version of it. And so he does it as a thing to like, hey, if this is what you want, I'm gonna give you this. And they're supposed to be offended by it and disgusted by it and laughed at. And it's like, I'm gonna show you. And instead of that, he gets a phone call saying that, they love it and they want it. People are, it's like a bidding war for this. And he's insulted that, it's his art. He's insulted that this is what's being accepted. But I don't know why he would be surprised, considering that that's what he knows the narrative that's being sold. So it's very interesting.
Because that's not what he, wanted. I think that when he made a decision to be, a writer, that he had his own version of what that was going to be. Again, it's going with what we said as artists. You know what I mean? I'm writing, to inform, but I'm writing from a place within myself and supplying that information to others. And now you're telling me to change the narrative of who I am, not just how I write, but who I am. Right. Because writing is something that comes from within, just like any other art form. And for it to now be like, that's the top seller, now I got to change who I am. You know what I'm saying? In order for me to exist in this world, now I have to start writing under a different narrative, and that's got to be soul aching. You know what I mean? In the sense of just the thought of him having to do that in order to be successful was not, obviously it tore him up. You know what I mean? It just really was not, it wasn't good for him, for his authentic self.
Yeah. But it's also kind of like, if you know that the kids eat cookies and you want them to eat healthy, either you give them the healthy food and know that it may not be eaten, or you bake them cookies against your better judgments and know the kids are going to be happy and eat them. Sometimes you can't have both. Sometimes you know what the audience want, and you might have a conflict with it, but the conflict might be, well, just because the artist has something to say doesn't mean that everybody has to like it. Or compromise and give them what they want, and then you could give them what they want and you get what you want from them, which would be success, money, or whatever. But sometimes if it doesn't align, you have to choose, and sometimes you can't have it all. Sometimes it might be you have to do, something else outside of what you normally do, so you can have the option to express yourself in the way you want to express yourself. So sometimes it works out. We got both, but
you just described Issa Rae's character, because I thought it was interesting. Without spoiling anything, I was looking for the connection. I was looking for a clear conversation on why we do what we do. And so now we just have to just imagine that connection happened just with her, that either she had a pointed situation like that where someone had the same conversation with her that was had with him, or she came out the box like, oh, I see, just doing my research, what sells. And this is the kind of author I'm going to be in order to, to make that money and and have that shine and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that's the only thing that I wish did happen, that there was some kind of like break, you know, where it was like he kind of asked that question and that conversation was kind of had.
That came up because he was kind of asking like, what's the difference? You know, there was a situation when they was on a book panel trying to decide what was going to be the like the book of the year or whatnot. And so they had a moment to themselves and was like, hey, can I ask you a question? And he's like, so what do you think this book is different than, you know, say what you write? And she was almost taken back by it. I was almost surprised that she wasn't acknowledging that it was close, because I kind of agreed with him, but she seemed to kind of taken back by saying that they were the same. And she kind of felt like the works of that book was kind of like soulless in a way. And he saw it to be the same. And she saw it to like, hey, you know, so how you feel about people liking that kind of garbage, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, hey, you know, that's what people like. He's like, you know, if that's what the people want and that's what I give them, then, you know, and she said, and plus it's not my story. These are stories of real people. I just asked people what their situation was and I wrote it and put it in a book. So it wasn't even like she even made it up, because I guess he thought that she was making up the stories, but she's saying she's chronicling people's, you know, real life. And to say like, even though you're offended by it, who are you to be offended by what somebody's reality is? Like, you may not like that. You don't have to choose to do this. So I think, so she made an effort she made that book on purpose. And I don't think at first I thought she wrote it and she was trying to be funny, but after the discussion, I see that she chose that because she know it sells, so she know what the audience want, because she mentioned the audience and the publishers, and that was her take on it. And maybe because she didn't have the stories to share, because she said, because he's like, you didn't grow up like that. She said, no, but these people in the book did. And I got their stories and I put them in a book. So to me, it's just like, oh, that kind of unraveled a whole bunch of stuff, because I thought she was just being messy, taking advantage of the situation, or she thought that kind of thing. Because almost going to the whole thing with Tyler Perry, you know, the same, like, is that really what he thinks of us? And that's what he thinks, and that's the kind of story he does, or he knows it works? Or is it a little bit of both? Maybe he lucked up across it, you know, because that's what he does, and people, you know, took it and ran, and we were like, oh, that worked? But it seemed like with her, it was a situation where, like I said, she did a lot of hard work and research on it, and that's what she found. So she also read the room, saying what was wanted, what was working, and she went and made that thing. Versus him doing it as a joke or to show how silly people are. You know, because think about it, regardless if he's writing crap or not, he still, from what we could tell, is a good writer. So even with the subject matter being crap doesn't mean he wouldn't still be a compelling writer, or that his style wouldn't shine even through, you know, because sometimes it's not like the cake, it's the icing, you know, the structure, but it's maybe they just allergic to coconut, and so they can't have it on there, so they can't eat it. So you remove the coconut, even though you hate to, because this is your signature coconut cake, but removing the coconut, making it where everybody can eat it. And you're pissed because it's not your original recipe, but it's what the people wanted. And so she was like, okay, what kind of cakes everybody like? Oh, this kind. Okay. And people can't eat that? No, they can't. People don't like that? No, they don't. Okay, I can make that without putting those things in and feel fine. Versus him removing the coconut and feeling tortured because he had to change his recipe, when he could just not gave it to everybody.
But this was spoken in third person though. Remember, he didn't have that clear, like,
third person for him, because he didn't tell her that he wrote the book.
Exactly.
But that doesn't change what the book is, though.
But I was speaking in the sense of that, me wishing that there was like this clear conversation of like, you know, and like you said, she did say it, but she was speaking for herself in that sense of like, this is the reason why I did this, as opposed to him kind of hiding himself in the sense of like, what do you think about this? Like an airy kind of like, you know, question, as opposed to it just being like, hey, I'm wrestling with this.
Because that wasn't his question. His question was, why is yours different than mine? Mm-hmm. And they got to the same place. They got it from different directions, but it's still the same, kind of the same end product, because they're both successful in the same way. So people are probably not picking it apart. He didn't give an honest question, but he got the answer to the question he asked.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
His main question is like, why do people like this kind of crap? And then also, why do you think yours is different than this one? And she gave the answer to both of them, and gave a good answer. Actually, she gave more answer than most artists, I think, would give the answer to somebody asking them something like that. I thought it was very honest and kind of like, oh. And like I said, I was surprised that she actually those are real life stories of people and stuff. And it kind of made me feel bad for even thinking how crazy it was. Because it doesn't change it not being crazy, but it's almost kind of like somebody screaming, right? And you're thinking like they just screaming for attention and you're pissed, right? And you find out the truth was, the kid slammed their hand in the door and was in pain. And it's like, oh,
right.
Oh. So hearing her story and explanation of that, because he thought it was going to be the typical answer and it wasn't. So when she gave her thing of that, it kind of deflated him a little bit, I'm sure, because he was kind of like, ooh. So it wasn't necessarily a cash grab. It was well thought out. He got to the same place. His soul had to be broken for him to get there. She just strategically knew what was needed and did it.
Right.
The same destination though. He just went the wrong. He went a different way, and he just like, even if I don't like something, like back in the day, I used to be like, man, as an artist, you gotta have something to say, and if you have nothing to say, then why, not to be messy, but it's just like landscapes and cats and dogs and stuff. Like, what's gonna work, right? Because what people buy. It's easy to see what's trending and all that kind of stuff. And you got some artists that be like, I'm gonna do that because it works. Other artists feel like that's demeaning because I'm not feeling that. Even though I know it work, I refuse to do it. So you just have different types. So, but they're not wrong for making something that people want. And some artists may not have nothing to say. Maybe they just like to paint and it's relaxing for them. And it's not this big statement that they got to share with the world. And so, who are we to like judge them for that when somebody made a deliberate decision to, do a certain type of art? And I think that's what kind of came up with the story in the book and stuff. And like I said, even though it was similar, they got there differently, but it doesn't change the end product of people enjoying it and liking it. Even if you feel personally like it's not for me. I almost was surprised by how far that went when it came up with him and his lady discussing that book, how he wouldn't back off of it and was almost offended that she liked the book. And she already said, like, she didn't know he wrote this book, but she already said she likes his writing style. She thinks he's brilliant and love his work already, right? It's his work that he feels proud of. And it's almost kind of like that same vibe, that same what, even regardless of you writing about something crazy or not, that same person, that's still your hands. So somebody who knows your hands, they will be accepting of the transition that you might make because it's like certain things are hitting right? And so instead of him thinking like, hey, she might just be relating to the stuff that she likes about my style of writing or my perspective, in spite of what's actually happening in the story, they like the narrative, right? And instead of him accepting that and being like, she really knows my work or she likes that's like somebody doing some 5 different styles of work and you can still pick out them because like, oh, they always use that color. Oh yeah, they always have that subject matter. So she's reading them. And he's offended by that. And so instead of giving her credit for being like, hey, you know me so well, you saw me in spite of not knowing it's me, he gets offended that she likes it. Like, what? But it was funny, but it was shown. And movies usually don't go there. And so I thought that was very powerful and very telling. Like, why can't it be all? Why can't it be both? You know who she is. So why would her liking that means that she's somebody else when she's showing you everything to show you who she is? Like, I'd be more worried about how somebody's acting than the stuff they read. They can read whoever they want to, but it's kind of like, how are you? I'm more concerned about that part. And if I saw that was what they were doing, was feeding into their life, then that's another thing too. But if it's like counter to that and you had enough time to see who she is and you worried about the book she read, that you wrote, that she already said she liked your style, and she relating to some stuff that it's like she had his cake before. And just because you changed the box, you like, why do you like that trash? And instead of being like, hey, I baked that cake too, how'd you know it was me? He got mad. He got mad. This movie got so much stuff going on. This movie got so much stuff that's, outside landmines and self-sabotage and narratives and the narratives he don't want to be a part of, but then he's putting those narratives on stuff and himself too, so it's a perfect example of somebody being guilty of what's being put on them is being put on other people. So the narrative that that everybody's not the same and we could be all encompassing, he don't give her that credit. He just automatically, you like that. So my narrative for you is that only simple people would like this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the same thing that, you know, the publishers are putting on him, saying that they only want this type of story, this kind of, you know, kind of thing. It's the same thing. So I thought, this movie, man, this movie.
Well, you know that line of, you know, I'm glad we got, what did they say something about, it's good to get the perspective from like Black folks or something. And then we kind of all laugh in the theater when the publisher said that, you know, like, is it like you just got it and dismissed it? So, you know,
but that's a perfect example of the truth of that situation, and to show what, you know, power and those in power. It's a perfect example of how we are appeased when it's said that you are giving something, but they didn't really give you something. That's a perfect example. And we wonder like, hey, this person works for this company. Hey, this person is the manager. Oh, this person, you know, it just shows regardless if you are a Black bus driver, the company who owns the bus dictates where it goes. So you are driving as the face, but you don't control the path and journey. And so you could say, hey, you're part of us, but what part do you play? And so in that situation, it was like us as Black people and this story, we're thinking the ramifications of people of this being out there because it promotes a narrative that we don't agree with. We feel this is belittling, this could be insulting, because sometimes in real life, people may not know what's best for them. It's a possibility. And it's almost like, you know, since you're asking us and we're seeing how this is, even though I'm sure somebody out there would like it, I'm not feeling comfortable with it. And that's the reason why we would be on the panel, right? To have our say. And so for it to be, even though they even had 2 Black people on the panel, the fact that it was 3 white people who had a different idea of things, it's still null and void and canceled the Black voice. Even though she's saying, I'm glad we had a chance to have the Black voices heard.
Right.
And that's the key word. It was heard, but not abided. We heard you. It just didn't make a difference. And so that was a perfect example of how a lot of stuff in society goes, where you see, you know, representation, but it's never steering the situation.
Right.
It's never steering the situation. So what is it then really? And so stuff like that, I was in a situation, and this is not art related, but part of a panel. And at first I thought, okay, this is my time to give input because I know about this and I could work this out and I could put my, you know, and I've seen enough examples of what's needed and blah, blah, blah. And I think it was after the first time, basically, first or second time, I was realizing that, you know, the situation's already decided. It was already decided, and it was just pageantry. And I'm like, oh, I'm not gonna sit here and waste my time and my, you know, brain and wisdom and sharing experiences just to be offset by a predetermined answer. Like, then what do you need? Don't use me for show. I could do other things with my time. So I just started not being on panels because I just knew it was a show. And so a lot of things are that way. And so sometimes, you know, you get excited that you were invited, but sometimes it's just for show. And so it's deniability from the folks doing the decision, saying like, hey, we considered everything, but it was really no consideration. And I think if people didn't already know, that they'll eventually find out that it's not the way they think it is. And a lot of stuff is predetermined and already decided. And a lot of times people are used as showpieces in a lot of different situations. And you could tell, it's kind of funny, when things are going to the side of the situation, it's swift, it's direct, even with the penalties if it is not abided, that happens so quickly, right? And then everybody else figures it out and hears it, you know, months later. And you're like, what's the new situation? Like, how did this happen? And nobody care about your opinion or explaining why and all this other kind of stuff. It is what it is, and you got to get over it, right?
Right.
So how is it when the supposed change that's wanted to be made, and they want all these voices and all these, minds to come together so we could change it? It's this padded kind of journey that, even before we make a change, that we're trying to find out the thought pattern so we could unravel it. Like, we didn't get here because of somebody hand holding us to this messed up situation. We got drugged there and dropped off and told, like, this is what it is. So if you're truly trying to make a change, then just like you flip the switch to cut it off, go flip the switch to cut it back on. There was no journey for you to cut it off. It was decided, you did it, and everybody had to get over it. Well, when you want to try to make something right or put something back, you cut the switch on. And the people are like, oh, what's all that? Yeah, this is what it is. Get over it.
That's good. Because like you said, there was ease turning it off. You know what I mean? There wasn't a panel to turn it off.
You woke up and that's what your new reality was. Nobody asked how you felt or how the people gonna feel. They didn't care when they cut stuff. They didn't care. They cut it off. They cut it off. And when you call it out and say, hey, why is this off? That's not cool. That's not right. That's not fair. Oh, let's discuss. Let's talk about this. Talk about turning something on that you never asked to turn off. Something that where was the discussion when you turned it off? There wasn't. So we don't need one cutting it back on. Anything else is biding time, for something else to come up to change the narrative. Boy. Yeah. But this movie is too real. It's too real. Because before I was kind of surprised that everybody was kind of catching it, but as I discuss it, I kind of see, I kind of see how it's just honest, and sometimes it's honest without exaggeration, and that can be dangerous because it's no fighting the medicine. It went down so smooth that you already took it and you had enough time to fight it. Like, whoops, I done took the medicine and whoops, now I took it, now I gotta deal with it, versus it being, taste bad or look crazy where you can question it before it gets in. So this movie just kind of goes down smooth, and then you wake up with like a lesson.
Yeah, or simplified for you. You know what I mean? Like those scenes that happen, like you said, when the remark was made about, glad we got some input, there was like a few minutes of, not necessarily silence, but it's almost kind of like they didn't break the third wall or the fourth wall or whatever wall there is, but we were looking at it like, wow, like we see you. We saw what just happened. So there was a lot of those things that went on for folks that know, if you know, that part, the beach part, there was always those parts without it being simplified, without it being like those two after that scene going into a room saying, can you believe that? Can you believe that just happened? We didn't need to see that.
And the way they did it and what they chose to do, because that could have easily been a white woman walking down the beach and we'd have been like, oh, there's Becky. But they took that away. They switched it up.
Right.
So they didn't go for the obvious, like, They didn't even go that. They didn't have to do that. And I thought that was very powerful. They didn't have to, they didn't go down the usual road. And so they go through the thing where publisher wants the book. They want the book. He got to pretend to be this whole other person, Oh, but not to pass up on purpose. I didn't mean to pass it up. But the whole part about his way of being creative and how his words come into life, and even his words that come to life questioning, you kind of see the mind of the artist and how he came up with everything. And so that was really neat to see as he's writing, this crazy novel, this hood opera, that you could see like these characters popping up and, they're saying something. He's like, oh no, he wouldn't say that. And kind of erasing it, and then another character popping up and, oh, this wouldn't happen. Oh yes, this, so to see his inner mind, his inner working in those characters, in their interaction with each other, that was really neat to see that. I thought it was like very powerful. And I don't know if I've seen it done like that before, but I thought it was really neat to see. Even though he's seen all that crazy hood stuff you know, he still had a different take on the language and how people were talking. So he couldn't avoid him, you know, and that almost lends to the whole thing with his lady liking the book, not knowing it's him, because even the stuff that we saw that he was writing with the characters acting it out, we could still see how they didn't talk like those stories are normally written.
Right.
So he probably still has sophistication, even though it was still a hood story. He still had an extra thing to it. And like I said, he didn't acknowledge that to his lady when he was asking her why did she like it, because she probably would have told him that if he would have gave her a chance to answer the question instead of just get mad and belittling her because she liked it. Because it was almost like some theater stuff. It was almost like some Shakespeare stuff.
Right,
you know?
right.
And I looked at my black face in the mirror and I'm like, wait, what? And you know, and that's in the audience, you're like, what? Like, I seen messed up interpretations, but even that was kind of like, ugh. So it was just funny, you know, but we don't want Tyler Perry to be as ignorant as he is, but then I don't want that either. But it was almost it almost at the extreme of the other side where it made it like it made it hood Shakespeare, you know, versus like Tyler Perry. It was this movie, like I said, he knew what he was doing when he did this, and it was already worked out. Like I said, this was not guessing on points that was being made or things that was being shown. This was all on purpose. You know, the guy, he did some other stuff that I liked as a writer. I saw that he was a journalist before. And so, and then just him being a young black guy that kind of went through the same kind of stuff and people asking him, what's your idea? Kind of like what we're doing here. Hi, what's your idea of this black thing that's happening that we just kind of want a narrative to explain, you know? And he's like, I'm tired of being that guy. I didn't want to have to be that guy for all my friends, have to explain all this other. So the fact that he said all that that shows in this, because it's all touched on. It's all touched on and brilliantly done. And like I said, it's not an obvious thing, but it was just, yeah. And so he writes this story, you know, and it gets successful, and they want to talk to the guy who wrote it and stuff. And so he got to be this character, play this character to go along with this book that he wrote. And it's just funny how the stuff that he did not want to do, he had to become that. He had to become that. So all that mess he was talking, all the stuff he's belittling, he had to become that. So his overreaction of these people, he should have been putting that on himself. Like, what did I have to become to do this? Like how come I didn't say no to this? Now I know he needed the money for his mom and stuff, but still, he could have had integrity and just like, I have to get a 9 to 5. He didn't have to do it. He took it and got mad instead of being like, you know, hey, I'm taking it for this reason, or hey, I don't think it's right, so I won't take it. He took it and then got mad that it worked. At any point, he could have backed out and said no. But he said yes to the money, right? So he had choice in it. And instead of being upfront about he wrote that trash, he get mad, why'd you like it? I would start with the place where it started. Like he started with her. Like he started with Issa Rae character. He started with her, right? He had a problem with the audience, but he went straight to the source. Like, why did you write? Ask yourself that. Don't get mad at the person, you know, get mad at the person swinging the stick, not the person that got hit. You can ask them too, but start with who did the damage first.
I mean, but if you're basing, you know, if you look back on us as a people in the sense that you think about the position he was in, where he was at, where his family's, you know, from, how he was raised, and, you know, you think about other folks that have to basically live on survival. You know what I mean? Like, I gotta make this money. Yeah. Doesn't matter how. It matters how. You know, there's dignity in the way that you earn your money as well. But like, he was wrestling with himself throughout that movie at so many points. You know what I mean? Because even when you said he had to become the character, it wasn't just in his mind. He physically had to become the character. And for his publisher to just be like, come on, just say this word or say this line, for him to even just think it's not anything that's going to affect you or harm you. You know, this leads to the money, and it leads to a certain, you know, a reason why you're doing it, but not thinking about how it would be, you know, destructive to him as a person as to from where he came. You know what I mean?
I think of it like this. The person who's offering is not as guilty as the person accepting. The publisher is doing his job, selling books.
Right.
The power was in him saying yes or no.
What does no lead to in a situation where you're just fired from your your 9 to 5, and you have this other job.
Getting another 9 to 5, or swallowing it and doing the art that you don't agree with, but not blaming everybody else for it. Either or. Gotcha. He wasn't wrong, but it's like you won and you complaining. It's like sometimes we don't, you know what? You prefer to get your money in the left hand, right? But it comes from the right hand. And so you're going to have a debate about what hand that money went to when you really need it. You can stand on your morals and be like, if it's not coming to my left hand, I don't want it. Right? Or you could take it from the right hand and get over it. Right?
So getting over it to you, meaning like if he just told the truth and said, this is what it is, this is who I am, you know what I mean?
Getting over it, like not blowing up on his woman about liking that book, or anybody else liking that book, or Issa Rae's character for writing a book like that.
Gotcha.
At least to me, he was mad at everybody. You know what I mean? Like, even when he was winning, he was just not comfortable with himself, you know?
Because that wasn't who he was. He wasn't being authentic. And you should not be comfortable with yourself. If you're not being authentic, you should be angry. But I get what you're saying. Be angry with yourself and not with, the folks beyond that.
Him being his authentic self gave him the situation that he got himself into. That got him as a teacher. That got him being suspended as a teacher. That got him his relationship, how he acts in his relationship, all that stuff. That was him being him. Him being closed off, him not sharing himself. Like, he's an artist that didn't want to compromise. And that's fair. But then, like I said, they're not paying you for you necessarily. If you could get that, then that's perfect. But it's almost kind of like you have Burger King, but you want to do steaks. You're in the wrong place then. The people do deserve better. You can do better than that. But the sign on the door, the sign on the top of the roof, it says Burger King. And they serve burgers. And you're there flipping burgers. And the people coming in are looking for burgers. So what you want and think don't matter. Because the sign up there says Burger King. You know how you can have it your way, actually? Is to leave. And open up your own steakhouse, if that's what you want. Those are options too.
But he always had an air about him. I mean, that was one of the kind of complaints the sister had and the brother had. He always had an air about him. So when it came down to making a decision, like you said, either, deal with it or, get off the pot, basically, there's like an elitism to it with him as well. Like, do you know who I am? It's almost like that. You know what I mean? Like, I've done this before and I've been successful. Why do I need to whittle myself down to this level?
And he doesn't have to. He did it to himself. He didn't have to. He wrote that story and he submitted it. And he said yes.
Reluctantly. We can add that part.
It could be reluctantly or whatever. Right. I reluctantly go to work every day and still a choice. It just seems silly to me because he was winning and still complaining, I guess. It's like, how people be mad at their blessings? It's like, why do you have to give it to me in the left hand? Is that $1,000 in your left hand?
Right.
Maybe shut up. Maybe thank you would be the next words coming out of your mouth. Maybe.
Right.
I'm insulted with the $1,000 in your hand. Oh, okay. That makes sense. I don't know. I understand the frustration, but also he could have stopped that anytime he wanted. You know what I mean? Like, that person's a drunk driver. You could get in there, but also getting in there, you accept the situation. I need to get home. Yeah, but you need to get home alive. That could be a long walk or a short trip off a bridge, possibly. Because the contract is you're getting in a car with a drunk driver and you get drunk prizes when you play drunk games. Possibly. Versus the hard way that'll take longer, but more than likely you'll make it. But you'll get in that car and be like, you're drunk, but you're drunk. You knew I was drunk when you got in the car. But you'll sit there and take the ride and complain about the person being drunk when you could have just not got in the car? Huh? Maybe I'm weird like that. But like I said, ain't never him having ego and feeling a certain kind of way. That's fine. And it got him success, to a certain level, but he wasn't fine with that, right? He needed more, I guess, and he really did have to step up because when he lost his job, he needed some more income. So I understand that. But it seemed like the judgment would go away when you understand like how the things works and you are stuck in a situation. So that's where you're gonna get humble. It seems like your ego shouldn't go up when you're going down. You know what I mean? Like that's when things should be unraveling and kind of letting you get a new perspective on the situation, not you complaining about it. Because it's like you don't have time to complain. This is time where you got to figure out how to get back on the ride or find a new one. But to be like, in a vulnerable situation and still talking about it or having an issue with it and complaining about it, that's a lot. That, sometimes we don't have the convenience of having both things, usually it's one or the other. It's, fight or flight. Yeah. So, but as an artist, I understand. And you want more and you expect more and you don't want to have to compromise your art, stuff like that. But that's why you either make the choice to do it in a different kind of way or work some other way around it, or just do it for you, or compromise, it's just choices. And I've seen it done in different ways. I've seen where people changed what they did. I've seen people who didn't want to change what they did, so they made income other kind of ways, and they just kind of, work it both ways or whatever until something picked up. That's just, and neither of it is wrong. But like I said, I just think it's interesting, the complaining and the fight about it. It's kind of like, if he's really felt that way about it, then don't contribute to it. He's sitting there talking to a person, trying to talk down to her in a roundabout way, by even comparing his crap that he thinks bad of to her stuff, and wondering like, why would you do that kind of thing, where he got an example of one reason why somebody would do it already in himself. Maybe he needed to ask himself that question instead of before he started going out asking outside, but he didn't. And then he got an answer that he probably didn't expect from her, like I said before. He
notoriously lacked humility. And I think that's a character in this film as well. There were opportunities for him to learn the lessons, and every time there was a lesson to be learned, he basically just, kind of poo-pooed on it until it started really kind of affecting him, where he had to take his rose-colored glasses off and see that he wasn't really gaining as much. His relationship with his sister, with his siblings, period, but individually with his sister, with his brother, with his mom, and with his love interests were all affected by his lack of humility. And I think with anybody that lacks it, if you haven't been taught it, if you've been praised all your life, or you feel like things have just kind of come to you either because someone gave them to you or you felt like you earned it, and some people earn it because they work really hard. Some people feel like they earn it because they're talented. He could have had all those issues just within himself. I mean, his sister kind of mentioned that throughout, why they weren't as close, because of his relationship with his father and how he saw his father through rose-colored glasses, and just found out, after, kind of meeting up with his sister, as old as they were, that he wasn't as shiny as he, professed, I guess, to himself to be. I don't know if his dad ever said, "I'm the greatest man in the world," but that's how he built his father up to be. So for his father to be kind of torn down in the sense by the sister, but not even like a, derogatory way, just a matter of fact way. Like, yeah, you didn't know that? Like, we knew it, and, brother knew it, and, maybe mom knew it too, and you didn't, was something that he had to kind of contend with. But he lived in his own world within that family as well. Because he mentioned, when the publisher said, you can go spend some time with your family, he said he didn't like his family. Mm-hmm. So you were expecting his family to be atrocious. Like, oh my God, his family's the worst. If he's succeeded this far in life, his family's probably just like, you find out he comes from a family of professional folks,
doctors and stuff.
People in the medical profession and all of that. You're like, this is the worst? That's the sign of him being elite and not having humility, to not be able to see at least that. Yeah. The audience saw it when the characters were introduced, because we were expecting, for us, the worst is like somebody that might be on drugs or something that's, just, or not living up to their expectations or their potential. He did not have that. He did not see what he had. you know, in front of him.
Yeah, because he was basically like Theo from the Cosby Show. His parents being doctors.
Right.
You know what I mean? And a successful sister and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, but I don't know, it just kind of goes back to the whole thing with their family, and because it all kind of kept going back to him. But truthfully, he dealt with things in a way that most of us do, where it's a lot of denial, it's a lot of blame, and it's a lot of outside things that we go to first instead of inward with the things that we start off with. Because it seemed like, you know, just Black families in general, we could be very guarded and very hard on ourselves, and not a lot of discussion and openness with certain kind of things. So all that stuff was very familiar, and where your family is, it determines how you are and how you behave and act outside. And it just shows that he continued that. And in some ways it made him successful, but it still wasn't a true representation of himself. The same thing his brother went through with him coming out. It's the same thing, you know, same situation. He was going a long time not being himself either. To the point where when he did become himself, or a version of himself, he almost overcompensated, because it's almost like, oh, now that I can. But when the whole thing came up with like wondering like, hey, you know, they made a point about how not knowing that dad knew, at least, you know, he couldn't reject you. But then his brother made a fine point of like, but I would have known. At least he would have knew me. And I knew he was denying and rejecting the actual me and not the perceived me. And so even his brother came to that understanding. And that's the same thing that Monk had to kind of come to for himself. But I think him and his brother saying that, I'm sure that kind of gave him some kind of insight. And his brother just blatantly saying, you know, there's people out there who want to love you, Monk, you know, let them love you. Even that, you know, like that's not what he was giving people, you know? And so, you know, like I said, he's kind of guilty of blaming everybody for what he was kind of guilty of as well. Like it was a lot of that too. And like I said, and it doesn't negate all the stuff that was happening. All that stuff was real, you know, like those are real scenarios, real issues, the layered mess that, you know, we go through, and subliminal stuff, and the unfair fairness of situations and stuff like that. You know, all the compromise of self. It's like I said, it's a lot of compromise of narrative for him, especially because he's our main character and it's his story, but everybody got compromised narratives. And it's funny because, like I said, even with the book stuff, and they wanted to change the name of the book, and he kept trying to go further and further to try to make them shake off and not want to deal with them, and they just kept going for it. And, you know, and that producer guy who thought he knew the plight of Black people in jail because he served some time, quote unquote time, you know, so he knows authentic, you know, Black folks that went to jail because of that time. He could read people. That whole encounter was hella funny, and I loved how it was done. And it was just like a person trying to fake give another person what they want, and the other person believe in the fakeness. So he was fake for doing it, and the guy was fake for believing it. And the fake person believing it thought he knew. You know what I mean? So that just goes to show for a lot of stuff, how people talking and stuff and think they know, and they think they can read. They don't know. You know, the fact that the story is the fact that this movie is what it is the same situation that was going on in the movie. And it was just so crazy that, you know, everybody's fighting the narrative. And that just went through with everything. Yeah, so yeah, so it was just a lot. And I liked how simple it was. And I liked how it was a family thing. And I liked how it doesn't take a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of spectacle to be a touching, compelling, and connecting story. So I think we hit most of the points that was inside the movie for the most part. But what did you think about the ending? And so we got this thing where they have their award, right? And the book that he didn't want to win, which is his book, wins. And they're calling out the name because this person won the award. And he steps up and he goes to accept it. And it's like, okay, so is he going to spill the beans, or is he just going to accept it? And, you know, since he's the other Black person, is he going to accept it for the writer since he's not showing up, and blah, blah, blah. So he goes up there and he looks into the crowd, and this woman walks through the door, and it's like, is this where I tell the truth? Is this where I give them who I am? This is where I just kind of, you know, have my question of how I feel about things in an honest way. Not no roundabout questions, but in an honest, straightforward way. The truth is, the book that he wrote should have been his struggle with that. He should be explaining the stuff that he sees on TV and how people sees us and the stuff he got to go through. That would have been a bestseller, possibly. If not, it would have been at least to help or give some insight. But instead of going that route, he leaned into the craziness and won, right? But he chose to do that, and he won. So when that happens, and then it stops up, and then you see that he's talking to the producer that he met earlier who wanted to produce his movie, and he's not liking that ending, you know? Like, it's a true ending. It's a real ending. And I'm assuming it's the kind of ending in a way, not exactly, but kind of an interpretation of the ending that probably really happened, right? With him going to, you know, to be upfront about, you know, the situation that happened, that the fact that he wrote the book, and that, you know, maybe just kind of give his 2 cents on the journey of it or whatnot. So when that was stopped up and the producer / director was asking, like, can you do something else with it? And he goes through these different scenarios of the different options that the ending could possibly be for the movie. Because really, if it's not an ending that producer, director likes, it's not going to happen. Because he's almost kind of like waiting for the ending. Oh, we can't do nothing with this yet, right? So even in his own black story, the producer's got waiting for a narrative that he likes before his story could be told. Right. Again. In another part of his life again. So it's just levels to it. Like, he never gets out the box. But what did you think of the different scenarios? Because you had one scenario where we find out in real life that his woman doesn't show up because he haven't spoken to her yet. So it's a narrative where he could have went back and it was time to get that trophy, and he just leaves the theater, and he leaves the award show, and he runs to go see his woman and knock on that door, and she's in the front. You can see her from the front of the house with the window, because she's in the window and she's reading the book, and he sees her. She grabs his eye. She sees it's him. She goes to the door, opens it. They look into each other's eyes, and it's a pan away. It pans out, right? You don't know the conversation. You just know that is the start of possibly a new chapter. That don't mean he gets her or not, but you know that he was attempting to resolve not the stage and the people and what people thought of the book, but chose her, and that would be the resolve, you know. And so he's like, yeah, nah. And he kind of gives the guy a look, and he's like, okay.
Well, there is this one.
What we could do is, this.
Right.
He goes there to tell the truth, and he got the trophy. SWAT comes in, his woman's there, and FBI, put your arms down. You know, could have been car keys, could have been a bag of Skittles.
Right.
Could have been grape drink.
Right.
Could have been his child. Could have been anything, right? Something is in his hands. He's suited and booted with a black tux and a tie. Arms open, pretty much, because he's holding a trophy. And they come in and they just open fire. Because it's confusion. Like, I'm not him. You know? He didn't get a chance to get the words out. And he's taken out like the Godfather. Right? They just empty out on him. And he's laying there dead in a pool of blood, right? And it's crazy. Is that should sound. We've seen enough examples where that's the truth. It's a possible truth. So something as outlandish as that should be, it's a viable option. And it's an option that the director thinks that they should go with. And so even the narrative of the movie was compromised. And like I said, this whole thing that he was trying to get out of, not be a part of and contribute to, he became that. He never got out of that, you know?
So if you're asking me how I felt about the end of it, so I think we would have to talk about the fact that, you know, we witnessed that part. Like, okay, well, you know, he tried and, you know, didn't get what he wanted out of it. But I think we would be talking about the fact that when all the chaos happens, how did we feel, or how did you feel? I know how I felt when I saw him, when the folks came in the room, all of it, his girl, you know, the SWAT team or whatever, you kind of knew what was next. It's almost like you seeing the person on the beach walking across, you knew what was going to happen, right? And I think I kind of glanced in your direction like, oh, here we go. You know what I mean? Like, we know what's going to happen. And he knew what was going to happen. As soon as they walked in, he was like, whoa, wait. It was almost like he was like, wait, don't do it. Like, I'm trying to justify this. And he was behind the podium at that time, and stepping away from it was his demise. You know, just being and the stepping away in, you know, normal life for a person of that hue would be the stance of just standing there with your arms open, like I don't have anything on me. And that's exactly what he did. You know, clearly what he had in his hand was something clear that you could see through. But instead it was just that one thing yelled, you know, or insinuated that it was a gun, and that was the end of that. And then it was like, now that's the ending. Let's do that. That's what the people came to see. That you did all this work, and at the end, you're just a regular, you know what I mean? Just a regular black man that's dealing with that risk every day in life, you know? And he knew that could be a viable ending by the way that he responded, by saying, well, there is this. This is in my back pocket. You know, let me go ahead and pull that out. I was surprised initially, like, oh, I thought it was going to be just this standard kind of, you know, rom-com ending to it. Like, oh, and the guy gets the girl and he tells the truth and deals with whatever comes his way afterwards. So to see it in that way was, you know, it wasn't disappointing. It was almost like, okay, there it is. You know, like, we should have figured it was going to be an ending that he had no control over, that was going to be controlled by the powers that be.
Always, I was surprised it ended that way. The whole movie, like I said, was a compromise of his narrative, so I wasn't surprised about that part. But I was surprised that, like I said, this movie just kept doing different stuff, because in most movies the person would have got their way, right? Like, that would have been the thing where it's like, I did all this compromise and this is what I'm gonna do for me, and it's gonna be fine. But he didn't even get that. Cause like almost like and I think that the director was kind of inspired partly by like Hollywood Shuffle. And even in Hollywood Shuffle, where Robert Townsend had to do these belittling characters and fight for these roles, and everybody's fighting for the, you know, to play the slave or the thug or whatever. Even at the end of that, you know, he didn't do those movies, and he ended up being like, you know, not Hollywood successful, but he's in a commercial playing a postman. Something with dignity, right? So he kind of gave up the Hollywood Shuffle, and he was fine with playing a postman that his grandma could be proud to see on TV, versus his compromised big stardom looking crazy, right? So I've seen movies where that's the kind of ending. So I was kind of thinking like, maybe we'll get that kind of ending for this, but no, he never got out. And it was just like the truth of the system. And it's true. And it's kind of like, regardless of all the movies and how much we complain and say and what we have issues with and explaining why we have issues with things, it's still the same. And I think it's a more honest ending, a more true ending, but an unfortunate ending as well.
But I think, you know, you bring up a great movie, you know, with Hollywood Shuffle, but the grandmother was his sounding board, that you know, resounding voice that was just like, what about you? You know what I mean? What about the representation of being good? And I don't believe that this character had it in this movie. It was just him always fighting himself. Was it self-sabotage? Yes, because he wouldn't reveal, you know, at points where he could have gotten, you know, some assistance in a sense of getting advice or help with his next steps. But it's still, the struggle in the end was still with himself. You know what I mean?
The reason why he wouldn't need a grandmother like figure or somebody telling him is because he already knew the issue. He wasn't walking in it blindly. He knew. He was the one yelling it out the whole movie that it was wrong. So It wasn't no understanding for that. It was his choice. Now, if he walked around not knowing he was feeding into the pot that he had a problem with, that'd be different. But he knew what he was doing. He was just screaming while he was doing it. But you did this, you did, while he was doing it at the same time. That's the rub. He was doing it at the same time he was yelling, complaining. He didn't need somebody to tell him it was wrong the way they represent black folks, and wrong how the system is, and wrong what the audience accepts. It's wrong that we are conditioned to like junk. It's wrong that, you know, it's on 24/7. It's wrong that something that represents black people, like a TV station or whatever, feeds poison to us. It's wrong that people have this story in the first place. It's wrong that everybody pretends like it's not happening. It's wrong how we feed the same machine we have a problem with that's destroying us. It's all wrong. And he knows all that. So who's going to tell him something new? He just chose to do something. He just chose to do it for the money. And he's not wrong for choosing that. But I'm just saying, don't sit there and complain about it. I'm just saying, he's part of the problem. He didn't have to choose it. But he did, and it's fine. I understand. Why shouldn't he not be successful? He can't change the machine, I guess. You know? His family is not insulted. His woman that you would think, because in some other kind of movie, his woman would have been the one to find out that he wrote that crap and then hated him, right? Any other movie, she would have been the thorn that's been like, you sold out your people for money? Baby, you could have got it from me. I wouldn't want you to blah, blah. It could have been any other kind of movie. That's what it would have been. But this movie, she liked it. And then he had a problem with her liking it. Oh, this movie. Oh, this movie. This, I don't care about awards. People just need to watch this movie. Like I said, man. So to me, he wasn't wrong. Like I said, it was just him complaining about this thing that he was doing. But no, he had a great point. I understand. And a lot of it I agree with. And I agree with the other side where it's really some people's story. Like I said, I got deflated when he talked to Issa Rae character and said how she got the information. And I was just like, yeah, you writing that ignorant crap on purpose and you know, making us look crazy. And she said it was from actual people and their stories. She just compiled them together because she knew that's what was trending. Like, you know, as an artist, you have a choice. Either you go with what's trending. Like I said, you could do your own thing and maybe break out and find your niche or whatever. But if you want like big, massive success, you have to fall into the parameters of what's considered that. Even if you don't like it, but I'm saying that's the thing. Like, it could work. Sometimes they have counter stuff that works, but it's hard. But you can't act like the freeway isn't quicker than the road with all the stops on it. That's what it's made for. And it's made for driving at 65 miles per hour. And that's what it's made for. So it works because that's what it's built for. And so either you want to drive that fast or you don't, you take the side roads. But it is what it is. When you chose that, and that's what you kind of get. And it's unfortunate, you know? It's unfortunate. And that's why it's so hard for us, you know? And that's why it's so slow for change, because the driver don't want to change it. And we don't have our own vehicle to decide for ourselves. And even the ones that try to, there's some other kind of issues that kind of pop up. Or if you already have it done, it could get burnt down mysteriously. So, you know, it was an honest ending. Even though it wasn't his. And once again, it's not reality. Obviously, he's not dead. So his reality was he admitted that he didn't resolve the thing with his girlfriend. He some kind of way worked out her relationship with his brother. They seem like they're in a good place because they're hanging out. Mm-hmm. Their mom is taken care of because he got some money. This publisher must be doing well because it worked out, right? And even though that's the truth, the lie of him getting shot up innocent in front of all these witnesses is what the narrative is going to be for that story. And that's what everybody's going to see. To the point where people probably going to see him walking around or see him on stuff and think like, I thought you died. Okay, so.
Great points.
You know, I think this is the only one we're talking about today. I need to decompress.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
There will be possibly, hopefully, a college course dedicated to this film at some point, maybe.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Or it will be spoken about at least, and kind of, you know, broken down in a sense.
Right. Like I said, just the fact that this movie was brought up to me a couple times. But that's art, though. But it's interesting how something that is outside of you, that's not even you, that you can relate to, can be flipped to be a personal thing.
But that's normal.
It is.
That impacts POCs in every part of their lives. You know what I mean? It could be personal, it could be work, it could be just every day. You know what I mean? There are books that are written about this kind of stuff. You know, White Fragility is one of those books. You know what I mean? And like, And that's not a book that's written for POCs as much as it's for what it speaks to, to get some kind of insight on yourself, that's interesting. And as we said, we kind of go into different avenues, but a lot of that happened during, George Floyd, where it was like, answer these questions. And here we are almost 3-4 years later, and we're still answering those questions. What was this movie about again? Just kidding.
The corruption of the Black narrative.
Or the theft of it.
But it's funny how a normal movie about an artist and a day in a life and the stuff that he's going through and his family and understanding and empathy and trying to succeed could carry all that stuff in it. Very unassuming. Right. Very unassuming. From watching that commercial, you wouldn't understand how all that stuff fit in one movie. It had all the stuff it was for, like family, understanding, struggle, success, new relationships, and all the stuff you didn't want: slavery, murder, corruption, Karens, the system, injustice, judgment.
It's a lot of responsibility.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And it was in one movie.
Yeah.
That could have been taken in so many different ways. Very unassuming. And like you said, the way that trailer was, it did lend to cast a wider net.
Yeah, that was purposeful.
Yeah, for sure.
Because if that part wasn't in there and it was just him saying, I don't want to write that kind of book, would it be as alluring? Would people say, that was funny, that part was funny, there's got to be more of that in it, so I want to go see that? And that's for everyone. Like you said, a wider net. It's for everyone. Yeah. No matter what your background is. Just like, I'm intrigued and I want to see that.
Yeah. It was interesting. So when the director / producer, when they kind of agreed on the ending that they're supposedly going to go with, we see Monk leave the studio and he's getting picked up by his brother. And it seemed like they're in a good place with their relationship, And when he gets into the car and he's about to drive off, he looks at this actor who's sitting in between breaks and he's dressed up like a slave.
Mm-hmm.
And he looks at the slave, the man playing the slave on break, and the actor is looking back at him. And I thought it was an interesting ending. I don't know quite how to take it, unless it's like, you go through this whole circle of everything and it's still the same crap regardless. Or at the end, that's how they see us regardless of what else happens, or that narrative happens in spite of the truth. It can mean a whole bunch of stuff, but I thought it was an interesting way to end. But it also showed that it was the outside of Hollywood. Like, it's all fake. It's on the studio lot, right? So it represents like the behind the scenes, and even behind the scenes, it's still a slave.
But it's all of that you just said. It's being a slave to the system.
Right, right. You're still a slave.
And the part that you mentioned about being, off topic in the sense of having sat, in rooms that you were invited to, as some of us have, I have that background as well. And putting yourself out there and putting your traumas out there and thinking that, this is going to do some kind of, this is going to change some things and it's going to be heard and it's going to make a difference. And then at the end, it doesn't. It actually was good that you talked about how it's padded, because that's what it was at the end. I don't remember if it was a head nod or what when he looked at him, but that's just what I want to imagine it was, because that's how we greet each other.
Yeah, I'm sure it was something like that. It was definitely acknowledgement of each other. It wasn't like they
he didn't, the guy that was playing a slave didn't look comfortable. You know what I mean? He's just on break.
Yeah.
It wasn't like he was like smiling like, I got a job. He it's time for me to eat, I'm on break, I'm doing this work or whatever. Mm-hmm. But that is the layers of it that that we're talking about. Like, you can't think about this movie and just keep unpacking these parts that all are relatable. You know what I mean? And I think that like the beauty of it is that it's almost no matter where you go, there you are. You know what I mean? No matter how high you climb, there you are. And we don't think necessarily that it's just the nuance in this is just, you're always going to be Black, or you're always going to be the N-word, or you're always going to be colored, or whatever the term is for the day. It's just, no matter where you go, there you are. And there you are is him sitting there in that garb of being a slave. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? That's who you are in this industry, and you could go beyond that and say in the world, but like in this industry as well,
And no matter who he is and his life and what he went through and his raising or his beliefs, his end product was still the same thing. A movie with death of a Black person, his product still would be on that Black network that they were showing a commercial for.
And what I find ironic is that I've said that I like slave narratives and you said you didn't, and it ended on the slave narrative, So there you go. It ended on that note. So
of course it did, because it's an honest movie. Because it's an honest movie. That's why. Sometimes the truth gets you sad answers, but I respect it. But I respect it.
Yeah, I just imagine, as I said from the beginning, getting that script and being those actors and just being like, I just can't wait to do this. I can't wait to play these characters. Like, I know exactly how I'm going to do these roles. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because I didn't see any of them really stretching. It wasn't like you haven't seen them. They were definitely playing different roles, but it was effortlessly playing. You know what I mean? It was seamless. It was like you know those people.
Yeah.
They weren't acting too far-fetched in the way that they portrayed themselves.
And it wasn't the likely actors that you expect in a movie like this. You know what I mean? Like, those are people you love and been seeing for years. And for them to be lost in characters like as if they were new people, that's amazing. Mm-hmm. Sterling K. Brown, I've seen him in a lot of stuff, but I love him in this movie. I've seen Tracy Ellis Ross in a lot of stuff, but I love her in this movie. I like Issa Rae. Like I said, with this much star power in a different kind of vehicle, it would be too distracting. So I was amazed that everybody came in there to work and do their thing. And, you could tell that that they felt it and they fell into those characters. Like I said, any other situation, it'd be like, oh, that's Tracy. No, they were who they were in that moment, and their performance superseded their real life personas. I really enjoyed this movie. I think there's a lot to it. I think this movie is much needed. I like the way it was done, and I hope people give it a chance. And 'cause like I said, I don't think it's being messy, but I think it's telling a lot of truths. And, and for ourselves, like we had to be accountable as well. We got to be accountable as well. It's acknowledgement of the system and the machine. It's acknowledgement of narratives that we have outside of ourselves that we can't control. It also shows that sometimes when we need to speak up and have our own narratives, we don't. And for, honest reasons. Sometimes we just wasn't raised in a certain kind of way, or certain environments, or certain things we went through. And so it's a lot of stuff. Any last words on the movie, or your thoughts on it or whatnot?
I wish that it was not just, in limited theaters, because what that brings on is like, when I was looking for it, I thought it had came out earlier than it did. And when it did come out, what usually happens is we go running for it. Like, where's that? Got to see it before it leaves the theater. And I get tired of that kind of stuff happening. And even with me, kind of mentioning it, posting something on it, when people make comments about, oh, it's on my list. And I'm like, you need to hurry up and go see it, because it might not be there. But then again, they're streaming now too. So that's the second realm of it. That's good. Like, if it's not in theaters, you can see it, at a theater near you at home. Yeah. But still, for you to hear about it and can't wait for it to come out. And like you said, it's in a small theater, or it's not in the theater near you. Mm-hmm. I wish it, it was more accessible. Yeah. I wish we had more access to it than that. I mean, there would probably be more people seeing it, in my area if it was down the street from me.
Yeah, of course.
And I'm saying that not in the sense that they don't want to go anywhere else to see it. Yeah. I just think that takes a commitment for people to want to travel outside of their block.
And we do it in spite of, and we have to, because we're used to having to go further than we normally do to get something that would be perceived as normal. That's from groceries, that's from clothing, that's from feeling safe to walk down the street. We might drive an hour away so we could walk down the street and shop without worrying about it. So we're used to compromising and going out of our way to support or to get a feeling, even if it's for a couple of hours, of what other people have every day. That's how we roll, unfortunately, that can afford to do that. So I'm just stuck in a nightmare all the time.
But then you know, like you just said, all of that is definitely true, but it limits everybody, you know, to seeing this movie. Even if it was like, we're going to, you know, put it in more theaters, but it's going to be, you know, in there for obviously the limited, you know, amount of time, but still put it in theaters where people can see it, even if it's just 2 shows a day, you know. It's
a good movie. Give it a fair shot. That's all.
Yeah.
But don't set it up bad, then talk about, look, it failed. Don't do that either.
Yeah. I thought it was, I don't know, I'm trying to find the words for it. And because I've seen that was the first one I saw, and I saw the other ones afterwards, but it was an easy film. It wasn't hard. It wasn't like, what does that mean? What does this mean? It wasn't above, you know, anyone. It had, you know, the points where you're supposed to laugh, you laugh. The points where you're supposed to think, you know, you were thinking. There were, you know, there was some hums in the audience, you know, when people understood those certain little nuances. Doesn't matter who they were, but we heard them in the audience, where people like, a lot of that, you know, where that was very familiar, you know, or just like you said, just everyday life. And, you know, I really did appreciate that part about the movie, that, you know, everything in a sense were teachable moments. Yeah. You know, if it wasn't, the teachable moments might not have matched everyone that's in the audience. We might not have learned everything at the same time. You know what I mean? There might have been things that obviously I already knew, and then there's also things that I learned, you know, from it as well. So, yeah, it was a great movie, and you know, more people need to see it.
For sure.
More people need to do whatever they got to do to see it. And I noticed it's not streaming. I know the Book of Clarence is starting to already.
Yeah, it's starting to, American Fiction is starting to stream as well, which I think is great. Okay. And if it's not going to advertise it correctly, then that's the next best thing to have it. Because like I said, it's click the button and watch it on TV at home, which is good because there's no big explosions. There's no reason why I need to be on the big screen, even though I enjoy the movies like that. But that could be easily on Netflix, and it'd be like one of those kind of, you dress warm on your couch and have a drink and just watch that movie and just laugh and take it in. But
yeah, that's a good point.
But I do love those kind of movies too in the theaters, because I like to laugh out loud or hear somebody else laugh, or just a communal experience for certain things like that. You know, the discussions that may happen afterwards.
I think I also like to see who comes into the theater.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I like to see the folks that are coming in there, you know, because those are stories in itself of like, you could have chose any movie, but you chose this one. Yeah. So you already know that they're interested, you know, when they come in, even if it's going to see, you know, one of these movies and there's only 5 people in there. It's still interesting to see that there's just 5 people in there, you know, so.
Yeah. But I think it's a great movie. I think people will get a lot from it. And like I said, it seems like people who are seeing it seem like they are catching it. And it's just interesting, people's takes on it and things like that. But this is like, I think he's a first time director. So for this to be his first outing and to be this strong, I thought it was just very interesting. Cause like I said, the nuance is a thing that's not come easy to everybody. It's so easy to be heavy-handed because like it's your first project, you want so much to say and you don't know that less is more. So all this kind of stuff. So when you see somebody that's just kind of navigating in a way where you're not just seeing this onslaught of carnage behind it and it's still cutting through, it's just nice to see. It's nice to see. And unless you know what's going on, it would be hard to kind of just dissect exactly what happened, but you just know you get the gist of it. And I think good art does that, where you don't have to see brush strokes and stuff. You don't have to see all that to get the brilliance of the overall piece. So
I mean, it also speaks to, it takes you on a journey that some of us, you know, in the community or outside have not seen African Americans in. And like I said, the beach house and the fact that they grew up in that, you know what I mean? They owned it. And across the street, you know, was a person that looked just like them who owned her spot. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost like the Cosby Show in that sense. You know what I mean? When that first came out, and, you know, some folks said it was unrealistic. That's not how, you know, Black folks normally live, or the average Black person lives. And it takes away, that's not the problem that they were trying to solve. They were just trying to show us that it exists. So I think it played to that too as well. And I was happy to see that, how natural and normal that was for them. It wasn't even like they spoke about it. You know what I mean? Like, we not supposed to be here, but we here. No, they've been there. You know, that was their place, you know. So I thought that was great.
And the experience they had is probably like how people who really do live on beachfronts, with the neighbor walking by having something to say.
Right. You can't wear shoes on the sand. You know what I mean? Anything.
Yeah. All right. So we both love the movie. Both suggest go check it out in a theater or in streaming. Like I said, this was a treasure. I really enjoyed it. This is a movie that I'll watch over and over again. If they ever put it on, like, where you could buy it, I would actually buy it just to have in my collection.
Yeah.
You know how stuff that we love kind of disappears magically. So if it's not in your hand, it don't exist.
I agree. I would definitely watch it again. Like, definitely watch it again, because it was just that good. There's treasures in it. There's like, oh man, I didn't see that part, or like, oh yeah, I forgot about that part. It's worthy of seeing twice for that reason. You can't go wrong with Jeffrey Wright and Sterling K. You just can't. You can't. And the two of them together, they were believable as brothers. You know what I mean? It wasn't even like, you know what I mean? We weren't even going with, like, you know, sometimes we could even get into colorism and stupid stuff like that. It was just like, no, they are definitely brothers.
Yeah.
You know, and that's those acting chops too. You know what I mean? Whatever it takes in that sense. That's the acting chops that they had, where it was like, you know, you could see them hanging off the set, just like still in character, being brothers.
It was beautiful to see.
Yeah.
All right. So that was Jay and Sebrenia discussing Jeffrey Wright's newest movie, American Fiction.
Well, I just wanted to say Jeffrey can do no wrong, right?
That's true. So true.
Thank you very much. Again, always a pleasure.
Until next time, peace.